couple of interesting speakers, but we also want to hear from you. This is as much a discussion and a community forum for all of us to sort of get our head around what's going on. So without further ado, we wanted to thank Chancellor Meehan for agreeing to come and open this up and moderate this initially, introduce our speakers. So what I want you to know, a lot of you know Chancellor Meehan is Chancellor Meehan. Some of you know him as Congressman Meehan. He's here. He wanted to do this. He's here because he's not a stranger to fighting powerful interests. When he was in Congress, he was well known for one of the leaders for campaign finance reform, which had obviously powerful interests on the other side, and against big tobacco. It was a big fight that has essentially been won in favor of the people that the Chancellor supported. So he is here with us today because he believes in what we're doing, and he wants to give you a chance in our Center for Public Opinion to generate a public debate about some of these issues that are important to us. So without further ado, let me introduce the Chancellor, who will introduce the speakers.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Twalke, and welcome to all of you to UMass Lowell and this open forum on the Occupy movement. If everyone thought Americans, particularly young Americans, have become apathetic about public engagement or civic discourse or democracy in general, I think we now have a lot of evidence to the contrary. The Tea Party arose a few years ago, a populist movement with a conservative bent that increased awareness from a conservative perspective on smaller government, opposition to taxes, and reduction of the national debt. And then, not that long ago, a matter of weeks ago, a small band of people on the other end of the political spectrum showed up on Wall Street to protest the economic divide in this country, among other issues. It has now blossomed into a national, if not international, movement. And we really see evidence of it all over the world, with rallies in cities and towns, large and small. What do the Tea Party members want? What do the Occupy movement people want? All of these, the answers to these issues, I think, may vary depending upon individual to individual and also from group to group. But the overriding themes that we see are dissatisfaction, government dissatisfaction with the status quo, and a willingness to speak out and be heard. If nothing else, we know that the interest in our democracy is alive and well. Now, one of the main purposes of the UMass Lowell Center for Public Opinion is to study the important issues of public interest. I want to say that I'm proud of the job that all of the folks headed by Professor Twalke have done in getting this public opinion center up and running and also getting engaged in discussion. What emerges from the Tea Party and the Occupy movement are questions about what kind of directions this country is going to go in. It requires us to pay attention, to get engaged in public discourse, and that's why having our center is so important. Following our successful September poll, the U.S. Senate debate in October was identified, and the Center for Public Opinion had a great debate. It was here on this campus. In fact, I have to tell you that that debate and the poll that the university did got all kinds of attention all over the country in a way that we really haven't gotten very much attention. So I think it was extremely successful. In fact, since we had the debate, I think there are 3 candidates who have since left the race. So I really think that we had a profound effect, not only in shaping that race. It was interesting because Elizabeth Warren had just gotten into the race, performed extremely well at the debate here, and her candidacy has taken off kind of as a result of that. But following that debate and that poll, the Center for Public Opinion identified the Occupy movement as a subject that really should get further analysis and further discussion. A national UMass Lowell poll was commissioned to sample public opinion on the Occupy and Tea Party movements in an attempt to understand the underlying ideology and place in the American political culture. The poll found that slightly more Americans view the Occupy Wall Street movement favorably than unfavorably, while perceptions are more sharply negative about the Tea Party. Yet many Americans who have positive impressions of one of the movements, despite ideological differences, feel that Wall Street and political action committees have way too much influence on politics, while people who are not very wealthy have very little, if any, influence at all. And it's something that I found in my period of time in Congress. It's one of the reasons why I felt that taking big money out of the political dialogue in this country is extremely important. In fact, in spite of the fact that we passed a campaign finance bill, which was a compromise on what we really needed to do, in my view, public financing of campaigns in America, despite that fact, the Supreme Court has since ruled most of the laws that we put in place of protections is unconstitutional, and now we see corporations and wealthy individuals basically being able to spend unlimited amounts of money in political campaigns in this country. And it's going to be increasingly difficult for average people in this country to have their voices heard. Hence, I think that's another reason why you see the Occupy movement and other movements around the country. We're here today to discuss the results and other findings of the poll and explore these populist movements. So I would now like to introduce our speakers. First is pollster Mike Morzicki. He's a consultant for UMass Lowell for our Center of Public Opinion, but he's also a nationally renowned expert in public opinion research, and he will discuss the results of the most recent poll. Dr. Jennifer Whitten-Woodring is an assistant professor of political science here at UMass Lowell, whose work focuses on protest, repression, and media freedom. Keith Berlingen is a senior politics major. He's a veteran of the Iraq War, serving 6 years in the United States Navy. Jay Hallenbach is also a senior politics major and an Iraq War veteran, serving 6 years in the United States Marine Corps. Both Keith and Jay are participants in Occupy Boston and are organizers of Occupy UMass Lowell. I don't know who the chances are. So what we're going to do is ask each of the individuals that are here to make opening comments, and then we can open it up and have a dialogue. And I thought that we'd probably go in the order. Mike, we'll start with you and go with the direct order. But thank you very much to all of you for being here, and thanks for everyone for showing up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chancellor Meehan, and it's great to be here this afternoon. We have, I think, some very interesting poll results here, and I'm going to step you through them. First, just a quick overview of the poll. It was conducted by Knowledge Networks. It was conducted online among a scientific sample, a probability-based sample of a little more than 1,000 adults across the country. It was fielded from October 28th through November 1st. It's important to keep in mind that 2 or 3 days before the poll began, there were the widely broadcast scenes of street clashes in Oakland after police raided an occupied encampment in Oakland. So potentially that had some effect on our results. And the sampling error was just about 4 percentage points. Partisanship and ideology inform and drive so much of public opinion on political and economic and social issues here. I wanted to just set the table with the contours of our overall sample. On partisanship, we have a plurality who call themselves independent. Among the rest, Democrats somewhat outnumber Republicans. This is all consistent with what other national polling has been finding lately. In terms of ideology in general, political views in general, again, we have plurality in the center among moderates, 48%. Among the rest, conservatives outnumber liberals by 8 points. So then to split the difference, we have a question on the role of government, and we have a pretty even split. It's a 3-point difference with a 4-point sampling error. It's not a significant difference between those who say government should do more to solve problems or is doing too many things better left to businesses and individuals. I would point out, I don't have a slide on this, but as Chancellor Meehan suggested, the followers, not followers, those who view each of the movements, the Occupy and Tea Party movements, favorably, tend to break in ways that you would expect on partisanship and ideology and the role of government.
those who view the Occupy movement favorably tend to be Democrats, more likely to be liberal and moderate, more likely to favor more activist government, 64% saying government should do more to solve problems, whereas those who view the Tea Party favorably are more likely to be Republican, conservative, almost 2/3 conservative, and 81% of Tea Party backers say government is doing too many things better left to businesses and individuals. Quickly on ideology, we did an experiment on this poll and on the Massachusetts poll, looking at ideology in general, your political views in general, and also looking at it by social issues such as gay marriage. The other half of the sample got these other two questions. Social issues such as gay marriage and abortion, you see more liberals there, fewer moderates, and about the same share of conservatives. But then when we ask about fiscal issues such as tax and spending, the tilt is more toward moderate and conservative and fewer liberals. So that moderate category can include not just people in the center, but some people who have liberal views on some issues and conservative on others. For a little more context, earlier polls on Occupy Wall Street, let's go back about a month. Mostly, the comparisons are a little difficult to make because of differences in question wording and in the methodology among the different polls, but mostly they were finding sentiment a little more positive toward Occupy Wall Street than negative. That seemed to be especially the case in the initial polling that was done, although there were substantially more people who weren't aware of the Occupy movement in the early going, and that is decreasing over time. I'd also point out one poll in specific, in particular the CBS New York Times poll in mid-October, asked on whether you agree or disagree with the views of Occupy Wall Street, and found a 16-point positive balance there. But when asked generally about the movement itself, only a 5-point positive tilt. Earlier Tea Party polls, this polling really began in early 2010, even though the movement had sprung up earlier in 2009. I think it was once it became clear that the Tea Party was going to have some legs and could have an impact on electoral politics with Tea Party affiliated candidates challenging Republican incumbents in primaries and that sort of thing. And we started to see polling. So we don't have polling from the very early stages of the Tea Party life cycle. But as of early 2010, generally opinion was slightly more positive, or at least even on the Tea Party, and that has turned negative over time. It seems that the debt ceiling debate last summer helped bump those the negative numbers up against the Tea Party, although it had been trending in that direction before then. And one other poll that I would highlight, USA Today Gallup about a year ago, asked about various effects of the Tea Party, and you had almost 3/4 saying that the Tea Party has energized people to become more involved in the political process. A little more than half saying it's made the major political parties more responsive to citizens, but at the same time, slightly more than half were saying that the Tea Party has created deeper political divisions in the United States. So our poll gauged overall impressions of Occupy Wall Street, the Tea Party, and in essence the main things that each of those movements are protesting against. We asked, again, this was online, so this was a grid, a 4-point scale, strongly favorable, somewhat favorable, and somewhat strongly unfavorable. To keep this simple, I will just present the net, the collapsed strongly plus somewhat, and the strongly responses for intensity. Among all Americans, slightly more viewed Occupy Wall Street unfavorably than favorably. That's a 5-point difference with 4-point sampling error. And we had about 1/4 who said don't know to that question. The Tea Party is viewed quite a bit more unfavorably on balance, with fully half of Americans having an unfavorable view, 29% favorable. But Wall Street and the government in Washington both engender far greater negative sentiment. 71% in each case view those institutions unfavorably. This is simply a graphical representation of the same data to help illustrate the differences in opinion toward each of these entities. Going back to this table, just looking at intensity, we see that strong unfavorable views predominate over strong favorable views toward the Tea Party by about 3-to-1. That's less the case toward Occupy Wall Street, but it's overwhelmingly so in views toward Wall Street and large corporations and the government in Washington. There is little overlap between those who view each of these movements favorably, only 10% compared to 22% who view both movements unfavorably. We also gauged how much influence these groups, each group have on American politics today. And we find widespread agreement that Wall Street and large corporations have too much influence, nearly as much agreement, 74% saying that political action committees have too much influence. The views of labor unions were distributed a bit more evenly across the board, and these views really related strongly to partisanship and ideology. Democrats, liberals view labor unions more positively than Republicans and conservatives. And then we get back to agreement that people who are not wealthy have too little influence on politics in America today. So with those large numbers in the previous slide, there's inevitably some common ground, even though there's little overlap between those who view the Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street favorably. There is common ground in some of their views. It's not surprising that Occupy Wall Street, its main target, obviously, a major target of its wrath, obviously, is Wall Street. Not surprisingly, very strongly unfavorable sentiment toward Wall Street among Occupy backers. But it may be surprising that almost 2/3 of Tea Party backers feel the same way. There is a difference, a 21-point difference, but here I view this mainly as, in both cases, the class being most important. In the other side of it, the Tea Party sprung up mainly in response to federal banking bailouts, federal economic stimulus, the national health care reform law, and there too, not surprisingly, thumbs down on the government in Washington. But that view is shared by nearly 3/4 of those who view Occupy Wall Street favorably as well. And intensity, again, we see there's quite a bit of strong sentiment in both of these. And just for comparison, looking at those who view both movements unfavorably, there's also strong negative sentiment toward Wall Street and the government in Washington, and those finally comparisons just among all. We also looked at the extent to which people who view each movement favorably feel about influence of Wall Street and PACs and people who are not wealthy. And again, there's largely agreement on this, that Wall Street has too much influence in PACs, and that people who are not wealthy have too little influence. So, that is all I have for now. I thank you very much.
I think Professor Whitten-Woodring, could you step up and maybe make some comments?
Hi. First of all, I want to put those numbers into a slightly different context, and that is that when we look at the fact that more people feel unfavorably about the Occupy movement, slightly more unfavorably than favorably, I think we have to remember that protest movements start from a point of illegitimacy. They're weird, they're fringe, and they're typically dismissed as such. So that's where they start out. Whereas government officials, CEOs of powerful companies start from a position of legitimacy. If you think of a ladder of influence, those political and economic elites are at the very top of the ladder of influence. And those are people who have remarkable access to media coverage and remarkable ability to control the message. If you go down, protesters really start at the bottom of that ladder of influence. So from the very beginning, protest organizers, protesters in general, have a very difficult struggle, first of all, to gain media attention at all, and then secondly, to control that message. So when I look at those numbers, I think that the Occupy Wall Street movement is actually doing remarkably well. That's not to say that it doesn't have significant challenges ahead if it wants to accomplish its goals, and the whole idea of how those goals are articulated or not articulated is another debate entirely. But certainly the goal of getting attention of the needs, about the needs for the 99%, that's definitely a goal of the Occupy Wall Street movement. And so they have significant challenges ahead. But in just a couple of short months, the Occupy Wall Street movement, or the Occupy movement, really has made significant accomplishments. From a few hundred protesters in Zuccotti Park, who were at first ignored by mainstream media, to a movement that has really gone global and garnered quite a significant amount of media attention and put policymakers and financiers on notice that there's a group of people who are very unhappy with the status quo. So they certainly accomplished quite a bit. It was very interesting at the beginning because very few people actually knew that this movement was going on. It was very difficult for the Occupy movement to gain any attention at all from mainstream media. Arguably, the pepper spray incident, where a few young female protesters who appeared to be very peacefully talking with police were sprayed with pepper spray. That particular incident really seemed to garner attention, and I think that's where the movement really began to gain some legitimacy. It didn't gain attention immediately from mainstream media, but it gained attention from the fringe media. That particular video, pictures of that incident were available on YouTube, Facebook. People were tweeting about it, and that's really how the movement began to gain ground. So it's really come a long way from that first initial moment where it couldn't even get attention from the local news in New York City. But protest movements always face challenges of mobilization and organization. And I think that's really where we have to put our attention now. If this movement is going to succeed, what's going to happen, as it seems to have hit some sort of plateau right now. So whether it goes up and continues to mobilize and gain control of the message and get more attention from policymakers and from Wall Street really remains to be seen. And I think it's going to come down to this whole issue of legitimacy. So the movement can gain legitimacy in a number of ways. Certainly, official reaction to the movement will go a long way toward that. If we see protesters who are peaceful being treated in a repressive way, being attacked, as we have seen in Oakland, that probably is going to fuel the movement. But if protesters engage in violence, that's going to detract from the legitimacy. So I think as we get into winter, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with the Occupy movement, because that's going to increase the cost of protesting. It's going to be cold, and being out there is going to become more and more difficult. So I think it's going to be very interesting to watch how that affects the movement, and also the ability of the movement to control the message is something that we all should watch. And I think we should actually get around to hearing from some people who are involved in the movement itself.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Next, we want to have Pete Galante to
My name is Keith Boulanger. I was born in Lowell,